want to turn now and talk about Beto O'Rourke. I'm embarrassed to say he is from the state of Texas. Beto O'Rourke, a Democrat presidential candidate. He's truly, honestly, been polling at like 0, 1, or 2 or something. He's not a serious contender. You know, it looks like unless someone else gets in the race, we're going to have the Democrat presidential contender will probably be either Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren. I think everyone else is kind of fading out. But Beto, there was a forum last week. It was a CNN town hall. And at this CNN town hall, there was a question posed to Beto O'Rourke. And I want to have the extremely wonderful producer, Matt. He is really a wonderful producer. Matt, play this for you. We'll talk about it for just a moment.
This is from your LGBTQ plan, and here's what you write. This is a quote. Freedom of religion is a fundamental right, but it should not be used to discriminate. Do you think religious institutions like colleges, churches, charities, should they lose their tax-exempt status if they oppose same-sex marriage?
Yes.
I want you to think about that for just a moment. Back when the Supreme Court handed down the Obergefell decision and basically said, you know, that all states had to honor same-sex marriage, many commentators at that time said, myself included, on my own show, on other people's show, where I was a substitute hosting people's show around that time, I was saying, this is going to raise more questions than it solves. It's going to raise more questions than is solved by this decision. One of those questions is, what degree of protection now does the federal government give to people who do not support same-sex marriage? So we had discussion, even back at the time of the decision, the question about things like, what if you are a church, a religious institution, a religious college, you know, all sorts of things that you could be. What if you were one of those entities and you actually believe that the scriptures teach that marriage is between one man and one woman, which, you know, throughout all of human history, throughout, you know, Christian history and Judaism and even Islam, the idea of marriage has been clearly one man and one woman. So, you know, what is going to happen to churches and religious schools and institutions if they want to continue teaching that marriage is what the Bible says it is, a man and a woman? Is that going to be allowed? And the defenders of the Obergefell decision, the advocates for gay marriage at the time said, that is ridiculous. That's a ridiculous hyperbole. Obviously, nothing is going to involve regulating the churches. Nothing is going to punish the churches. This is a silly, absurd concern. You're just grasping at straws. Really mocked and dismissed the argument that people might be actually worried about religious freedom and the right and willingness and the ability of churches and religious institutions to teach their view of marriage. Well, here we are, folks. We're in the 2019 presidential candidacy, the debate with the Democrat presidential candidates on CNN, and Beto O'Rourke is saying that if a Christian church supports traditional marriage, interprets the Bible to say they support traditional marriage, they should lose their tax-exempt status. Now, on the tax-exempt part, folks, I have to say, among the reasons federal law provided long ago, provided for tax-exempt status for churches was to avoid excessive entanglement, because they did not want to have the government litigating, criminally penalizing, and investigating churches. It was a very healthy recognition. We're better off, the U.S. government in this constitutional republic, we're better off with a hands-off attitude. That was the reason, you know, instead of having churches having to argue about, you know, should this be considered income, or is this really some other form of money that came in that isn't really income? Having the government, the IRS suing churches, all of that was part of the reason was to prevent the entanglement of the government and religion. That thought was very prevalent at a time in America where more people thought that religion had a significant place in our culture, in our fabric, in our country, in our national identity. That the Christian faith and the Jewish faith had very strong place and a right to recognition, to be honored in the American culture, in our American system of laws. Where we are in 2019 is that Beto O'Rourke is saying that the left-wing view of anything goes in marriage Doesn't matter, it's 2 people, and you know, before long it'll be 3 people and all sorts of other combinations. What he's saying is left-wing secularism trumps what the Bible teaches. The LGBTQ agenda that advocates for same-sex marriage must be honored by the federal government more than the federal government will be honoring its continued commitment to not entangle the government and religion. Beto O'Rourke is saying that he more worships the LGBTQ agenda, the left-wing worldview, than he does the right of religious freedom of churches. On top of that, I want you to think about how this would work. So suppose he's not going to become president, but someone who thinks like him became president. So you get into the Oval Office and you hear about a church that is holding a revival meeting. And they're holding a revival meeting because they want to talk about the importance of renewing the commitment of marriage, the institution of marriage in our society, and they're celebrating traditional marriage. Is that enough to pull their tax-exempt status? And then if they do, and they're going to have the church sue the federal government to say, hey, wait a minute, we're still a church, we still will get our tax-exempt status. And that's just one example. But the other point of this just cavalier attitude, and it's not even really cavalier, that is too kind to Beto O'Rourke. Beto O'Rourke and the American left are desperate to get the attention and get the vote of the most radical elements of our society. They will say anything the LGBTQ world wants them to say. Anything. Whatever the agenda is, whatever the message is, you can count on Beto and the American left to embrace it. So you're at the point where they're willing to say they're more concerned about humoring and honoring the LGBTQ agenda and mission and same-sex marriage than they are honoring the right of a church to teach what it believes the Bible teaches. This is a complete slap in the face to people of faith in this country. And actually, to be really clear, at the time, people at that little exchange, people were saying, well, gee, I noticed he didn't, say what he would do about mosques, because the Islamic faith also teaches marriage as man and a woman, or, a man and 4 women, whatever they want to do. But he did clarify later, apparently. Someone asked him, well, are you even going to apply that to mosque? He said, oh, yeah, yes, I am. So, okay, that's where he is. But understand, it is a reflection of the culture of our country that a serious candidate for the presidency of the United States is completely willing to mock the right of Christian churches and Jewish synagogues and Islamic mosques, mock and belittle their right to say they actually believe in the doctrines they teach. That's what he's saying. They're to be mocked, ridiculed. It's ridiculous. They aren't allowed to think that. They're not allowed to say that. I can just belittle them because they dared say something that violates the church of the LGBTQ. And I'll tell you the last thing, folks, that this why it's bothersome. I'll turn to one more story after this, but it's bothersome on the free speech level. What if all the church does, a mosque or a synagogue is in Sunday school, in classes with little children, when a Sunday school teacher is talking about what marriage is and says, well, our faith, our church believes that marriage is between a man and a woman, and here's where it is in the Bible, this is what we believe in, this is what marriage is. And so some kid goes home and tells his parents, and the parents report him. Is that enough to lose your tax-exempt status? I'm not saying the tax-exempt status is such a be-all and end-all. I mean, it is a great thing that keeps the government and churches from suing each other, so it's a good thing. But it's really a symbol of respect for the importance and the primacy of faith in our country that we years ago decided to keep the taxing system away from the churches in this country. And that would be apparently with Beto O'Rourke just fine to eliminate, just fine to ignore. And so he's really saying, ultimately you're going to get to, folks, so if a church loses their tax-exempt status, what about people? When does free speech come along? What about the free speech right of the pastor or the Sunday school teacher or anyone at a church or anyone at a synagogue or a mosque? What about their right to speak? And he's saying you get punished for speaking. We'll take away your tax-exempt status, and will punish you for your speech. Very unwise. I think he's, as I say, he's desperate. He's looking for anything to get some votes, but he's not that far afield from the way left-wing thinkers think. The elevation of the LGBTQ agenda really kind of trumps everything else in the left-wing world mindset, where religion is to be cast aside as something kind of silly, antiquated, and irrelevant to the modern era. And I hope there are enough American voters who can tell them that they are wrong.